Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third book discussion session under our series Rendezvous with the Author. We have all realized how educative and illuminating it is to interact directly with accomplished authors who are senior practitioners in various fields. And today, to enlighten us further, we have Shri Shakti Sinha ji with us. Sinha ji, we are grateful that you are here with us and welcome to the discussion.
Thank you, Dipanshu. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you. Look forward to your grilling me.
Sinha ji was part of the Indian Administrative Service from the 1979 batch. After serving in multiple administrative roles, he worked with Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji very closely for 3.5 years in the 1990s as secretary to the leader of opposition, because Vajpayee ji was serving as the leader of opposition during that time. And after serving as the secretary to LOP, Mr. Sinha served as his private secretary 1998 to 1999. He was also the director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and he's a distinguished fellow at the India Foundation. He recently wrote a book titled Vajpayee-The Years That Changed India, which is the topic of today's discussion. The book talks about a person who led one of the most transformative governments in the Indian history. And this book is an insider's view to Vajpayee's PMO's functioning. It is this insider's view that we'll discuss today. But before we do that, let's hear out Mr. Sinha as he briefly describes the book, discusses the book, his reason for writing one, what made him choose his topic, etc. Over to you, Sinha ji.
Thank you, Dipanshu. Thank you very much. Of course, there are always different motivations for writing a book. My motivation is that I was there, physically present, a fly on the wall, watching things happening. And in retrospect, I thought after 18, 19 years, people don't really appreciate the difficulty that India went through at that period, how Mr. Vajpayee handled it, and how actually it has had a lasting impact. See, change is a very odd thing. You never see it happening. It's only with retrospect that you realize that certain momentous changes have actually taken place. Every change is not a big bang change. Many changes look incremental, but actually are very decisive. And that I thought was not being appreciated enough. In any case, I mean, most of our books on contemporary history, I mean, I'm not criticizing others, some are outstanding, of course, but many of them are a little perfunctory in the sense that they jump from topic to topic and do not actually flesh out. And I thought I had this opportunity. It's up to the readers to judge whether I've done a good job or not. I thought I had this opportunity to bring out these tensions very clearly, explaining really the uniqueness of that situation, how Mr. Vajpayee handled it. And I mentally have 5 points, which really made all the difference, which is why the book was titled Vajpayee, The Years That Changed India. India, of course, changes, but some changes are momentous changes. The second factor, I felt that some of the languages being used in the political discourse today, it resonated in me because I'd heard it before. And even though Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Modi are two very different persons, they belong to the same party, the certain core values were the same, but in many which ways, they're very different people, right? And yet, this kind of lazy categorization, the lazy labeling, I thought was not being fair to either of them and not being fair to the Indian political discourse. We are evolving as a democracy. We go up, we go down, we shift gears. That happens. Right? Let's not get too disappointed or very thrilled. It's a part of a journey. It's a difficult journey. It's very difficult for a deeply hierarchical society like India in 47 to reach a stage where democracy, which meant equality, really moved so much. So these were the two primary factors that I thought I had in mind to really put forward and let the leaders decide that what I've done good. Some people say I've been too detailed. Others said, "Aapne masala nahi dala, should have brought in some gossip." That is not my genre. Others can do a better job of it. Let them do it. It's not my strength. I thought that my core strength was to go into details and look at it, and I've tried to do that.
Surely, sir. India was definitely going through multiple challenges at that point of time, whether we talk about economy, national security, or any other thing. In fact, on the day of his, sad demise, I saw one Facebook user who summed up Vajpayee according to him as, that the man was jailed at 17 by the Britishers, jailed again in 1975 during the emergency, failed to hold the full PM term twice, and then at the grand age of 75 led one of the most transformational governments in Indian history, loved good food, adored dogs, and found time to write exquisite poetry, fought the ugliest battles with utmost civility, and always smiled under duress.
That's really nice. That's very nice description. Whoever wrote it, if it's your language, outstanding. I think it describes him really well.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, sir. So we often say, that, and we often believe that too, that India got its political freedom from the Britishers in 1947, and economic freedom only in 1991 due to the reforms brought in by the Rao government.
Yes.
But we often forget how those reforms soon lost their way. Once the government was voted out of power, and we soon had multiple prime ministers, multiple governments that didn't last, their full term. And in fact, a lot of those reforms, they were quite lost, in reaching out to their goal. What started off in 1991 lost steam midway. But it was actually this India government under Mr. Vajpayee that implemented, those reforms to a great degree, with large-scale privatization wherever required, large infrastructure projects. So could you talk more about the economic and infrastructural transformation that Mr. Vajpayee ushered in? Because that's one area that's probably not given due importance. Economic narrative is towards the 1996 government.
Absolutely. I'm glad you raised the point. Most people talk about the security part. It is very important also. But I think you really hit the nail on the head. Mr. Vajpayee was a reformer at heart. By reformer, he meant that the private sector, the entrepreneurs. And private sector is not just the big factory. Private sector is a little person running a shop on the road, somebody trying to do lathe work. The guy is selling cycles. The lady ironing your clothes. This is the private sector. How do we free them and enable them and facilitate their productive economic actors so they could contribute, right? He was very clear in that. He also was very clear that state should deliver certain things. The market does the rest. And you should have proper pricing for it. Where the poor required help, give it upfront. Give it upfront. It's not that force them to pay they can't afford. To some extent, these kind of goods must be subsidized, but clearly and transparently. Now, you're right, Narasimha Rao government launched the reforms in 91. They actually lost steam by 93 itself. By 93, the government had shifted into a political mode completely. So there were defections from parties, Congress was becoming larger in strength, assembly elections they had lost, the Babri Masjid thing had happened. So by then it was in a political crisis mode. Then the scams started coming one by one. They had really lost them. The two UF governments made some brief efforts, but they clearly lacked the stamina or the depth to really do it. So to be fair, Deve Gowda was fairly in his own way. We had a party of very small. He tried his best, but then simply couldn't do it. Mr. Vajpayee realized that 98 was a bad year for us. He inherited a government where fiscal affairs were a complete mess, and India was bogged down. India had to break out. The feeling of despondency was so great at that time. India had to break out, which just started with his 99 budget onwards. Because my book ends in N99, I'm not going into the details other than the telecom policy and the starting of the highway policy. So on one hand, the telecom sector was in a mess. We did better in the private sector, but we did not think through the thing. And the companies were all failing because license fee was very high. We shifted from a fixed license fee to revenue sharing. And that suddenly, I mean, can you imagine receiving a phone call at 16 rupees a minute in 1998? That's the equivalent of 150 rupees to pay a minute. I mean, we were in that situation. And by moving out, by saying, no, mistakes have been made in policy, let's rectify the mistakes. Yes, we have a contract with the players, but the players shut down, who suffers? Not just the players, society suffers, right? Today, you realize that the cell phone is important for a plumber, for a vegetable seller, for a driver, for an electrician, right? We need to contact them through the phones. They're able to come to us. I mean, it liberates them. That feels. And building on that, India needed much better infrastructure. Now, things like roads, very difficult to get the private sector going unless the demands are very high. Here, you have to facilitate so the demand would pick up. In one sense, you have to put in the supply first to get the demand going. Because there was a lot of potential demand, suppressed demand, which was not coming up. So the highways project. And then moving on to that, fair amount of fiscal consolidation, privatization that you mentioned, fair amount of restructuring, and that really enabled the economy. It took 2-3 years to turn the ship around, and really then took off. From 2003 onward, it took off. It was later helped by the global liquidity. So the world was flush with liquidity. Together it worked. And then from there, 2003 to 2008 or 9, India did really, really well. Had those reforms not come about, we would not have been able to take advantage of the global liquidity. To do that, you had institutions in place, which came into institutions and structures in place, which happened in Mr. Vajpayee's day. So in that sense, Mr. Vajpayee, economic impact has been largely underestimated, including by serious commentators who really, they look at the big picture, but somehow they miss these things. I wonder why. I hope someday somebody covers this aspect. My book doesn't actually, it just covers it very minutely, very minor way. This does require a much better fleshing out. The strengths, the inadequacies, what didn't happen, that also must be understood. Not that the government was great. It did many good things. It can't do some other things. I think that should be studied and it'll help us in going forward.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, there's one question, based on what you've told us about the economic transformation brought in by the government. When you talk about the 1991 reforms, a lot of it was because there was a crisis staring at us. Probably if that crisis wouldn't have happened at that point of time, we would not have seen the urgency in bringing out those reforms. And in fact, that urgency became the topic of discussion when we read the book called India Grows at Night, because they believe that it grows despite the politicians. We read Accidental India, says how crisis only drive major policy solutions. But do you think in Mr. Vajpayee's case, the economic transformation was more deliberate rather than the 1998 economic situation? Or would you believe that it was a crisis that really made him spring into action?
No, when you go on a low gear, when you're trapped in a low equilibrium, it doesn't seem like a crisis, right? And you can actually go along at that stage. 91, crisis was staring you in the face. You had no options. If you needed liquidity, you needed the IMF, you needed the World Bank, they had a prescription, you had to follow it. And though there was thinking in India from before, from 89 onward, people were suggesting changes in policy. Ideation was there, but acceptance was not there at the top. The crisis forced acceptance. 98, there was no such pressure to change policy. Absolutely. It was low equilibrium, as I said, but to then understand that we have to grow, we have to break out of this, we cannot be stuck at 4%, 3.5%, 4%, 5%. We have to go further. I think that made all the difference. And the highways was a classical case. We have underestimated the highways and telecom, rural roads, how much of a multiplier it had on the economic activities, much beyond what people would normally associate, just roads. So in that sense, to do it without a crisis in your face requires a tremendous amount of vision and strength to carry forward. If you like privatization. We didn't use the word privatization then. We were calling it disinvestment. But government sell shares in good companies to other public sector undertakings and banks. That is not privatization. Privatization really change of mindset. Give it to somebody else to run the thing and then monetize it when things improve.
And to actually do it at a time when, a typical politician's attitude was not considered pro-private market, at that point of time, it was really, legendary. And we actually see that visionary leadership coming out, not just in the, economic area or the economic domain, but also on the national security front. Because actually one of the most, iconic steps, that the Vajpayee government took was to make India a nuclear power in the interest of national security. In fact, that's one of the representative incidents, if you talk about the government, of Mr. Vajpayee, that he's remembered for the, nuclear power push. Now, almost all public policy, decisions say involve something you gain. In fact, talk about decisions that impact the entire world. But a layman, doesn't see that layoff. To us, every policy decision is very oversimplified. We just look upon things in a very black and white way without realizing that always in the gray area. So for our benefit, because all of us are very much interested in these incidents and policy discourse and etc. For our benefit, can you describe the factors, the pulls and pressures, the layoffs that the government had to face, be it diplomatic, economic, political, that Mr. Vajpayee, had to factor while deciding to go nuclear? So could you describe the build up to that process?
I would. In fact, when I say I have 5 main themes in the book, nuclear is the second theme, and it is a very important theme. Essentially, Mr. Vajpayee was anti-nuclear. He wrote a poem called Hiroshima to say, how could those guys who invented the bomb go to sleep thinking of the innocents who died in Hiroshima? So, he was powerful. But once China had the bomb, and China was a long-term rival, China was an occupation of your territory, China was propping up Pakistan, you had to defend yourself through deterrence. In the sense that if you had a nuclear option going for you, then chances of a war would actually recede. We saw it in the Cold War, and we're seeing it now in that sense, somewhat, in the world also. But Mrs. Gandhi did the first explosion, May 18th, 1974, with her smile. But then she panicked at the world reaction, and it was called a peaceful nuclear explosion. It's peaceful. Why would you need an explosion? You can do it in the laboratory, Panicked. Then we moved slowly and fits and started. We did a fair amount of weaponization work and started, but you needed to test. Now your test was 74. By mid 1990s, they were irrelevant. World had changed, technologies had changed. You needed to do it properly. But the feeling in the world against the testing had grown very, very strong. The comprehensive test ban treaty had come into effect, bypassing India. India had strongly opposed it. The world bypassed us and went ahead, did it to some legal stratagems. Leave that aside. In that scenario, India needed to test. Before that, Narasimha Rao tried to test in November of 1995. The Americans told him, listen, we can't prevent you testing. After test, you know the consequences. And Narasimha Rao government backed out. Vajpayee in 96 in the short 15-day government wanted to test. Clearly, time was not enough to test. And therefore, 1998 he came, he realized that the window is almost closed. If India did not test, then India would never, ever test. And that was a frightening proposition. And therefore, the first priority of the government, even when the government was being formed and allies were fighting and politically you were in trouble, there was no honeymoon, he went ahead with the decision to test. Very well done. Testing happened. One test, people say, has issues with that, but that's fine. Otherwise, our designs of the atomic weapon system were by and large vindicated. So you needed to have proof of your designs, right? You got the proof of the designs. But then the world, I've never seen such a hostile international environment, and I hope I never see it again. I mean, all funding cut off from the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Japan, which is giving us $1 billion. $1 billion in 1998, $10 billion today on an economy then which was 450 billion. So you can imagine what that amounts to, large amounts. Stopped, all contacts stopped, and the language being used against India. I mean, 4-letter words were being used against India by foreign dignitaries. Your scientists under training in the USA were sent back. Your army men were sent back under training. And they became an international pariah, complete pariah. And when Pakistan tested after 17 days, they didn't get the plane. Even the Security Council resolution said Pakistan basically test was India tested. Now, can you start a nuclear program and test a device in 18 days? Obviously not. The Pakistani program was very much there. But they got the free ride. Nobody criticized them. Everything was directed at India. China was really upset. Americans were very upset. Clinton was to go to China. They were devising a G2 to run the world. And they were livid at India. In that, to ride it out, yes, there are economic prices to be paid, but the security of the nation rides over everything else. How can you have economic prosperity if you don't have your freedom, if you're not secure, if you're being invaded? So that had to be done. It required tremendous amount of sagacity, massive amount of criticisms, nationally. Parliament was attacked. Somebody even suggested you could have tested but not told the world. Others said, what happened suddenly to test? No, your window was closing. If you did not test, you would never test. If you did not become nuclear weapons power, chances are instability in South Asia would have gone up by many orders of magnitude. Therefore, again, you needed to test it. And Vajpayee, first Prime Minister really, to really bite the bullet. Mrs. Gandhi, I said, half bit the bullet and then throw it out. He bit the bullet. That was, I think, a remarkable feature.
Sure, sir. But sir, could you tell us what exactly was different about that situation? As in, if the government wouldn't have gone ahead with testing the nuclear, bomb at that point of time, why would not have it happened in the future? Like, what was special about that time? What were we losing out upon if you would not have tested at that point of time?
Yeah, as I said, the comprehensive test ban treaty had come into place. Mm-hmm. The nuclear non-proliferation treaty of 67 was lapsing and was just being extended. So in that sense, the entire world environment would have been, you would have gone North Korea. If you had tested after that, if you delayed testing in 1998 and tried to test in 2004, you would have become like North Korea today. So you really had, the window was closing so fast, international opinion against testing was becoming so strong. And people thought this is the post-Cold War, there'll be no more wars, why do companies need nuclear weapons, you spend on your development, all good arguments. But if you're faced with a long-term potential adversary who can affect you and hit you hard, you needed to test. So that, as I said, if we did not test in 1998, there was no crisis. People said, what was the crisis? You don't need a crisis to do the right thing. You are testing to establish India's long-term security. Having tested in the ground on two different days, 11th and 13th, now you have all those designs validated. Now through computer simulation, you can update them every now and then, right? With new research. But your designs from the 70s were out of date. The world had moved on, and upgrading those designs would really have been trying to convert a bullock cart into a Ferrari or something. It was simply not possible. You had to test. You were already late. You should have tested in the 70s and the 80s. You did not. Anyway, better late than never. But if, as I said, not in 98, never.
Definitely, sir. And we all know that as a fallout of that decision, we really had our relations with the US going further south. They were really not north before that, but they went further south. So how exactly was the NDA government while exiting the office in 2004? How was the NDA government under Mr. Vajpayee able to improve or amend its relations with the US and get the Indian foreign policy establishments psyche out of the Cold War era? Because that was what we always used to see, right? I mean, they used to see upon US and Soviet as a very zero-sum game thing. At the moment we go close to the US, Soviet is gonna be after us. So a lot of economic interests and national security interests, in fact India's international situation, all of these factors were ignored only because we didn't want to get out of that psyche. So how was he able to do that? Because we almost see like a radical transformation, right? He enters office, US relations south, he leaves, and everything is north with them.
Yeah, absolutely. One, of course, this was a Cold War had ended. Soviet was no longer there. Nobody was there in the United Nations to stand by you with vetoes if you had bad resolutions, which is why we got condemnation from the Security Council on the nuclear bomb. It never have happened in the Cold War time. Russia was there to stop it, right? Now Russia was not there. China had not emerged, but was emerging. Potentially, you could see China ultimately posing a threat. This happened 20 years later on. 20 years ago, nobody believed it would have happened. It had happened, right? And therefore, you needed in this post-Cold War era to shed your ideological Cold War baggage and say, yes, we will work with America. Fortunately, there were parts of the American establishment which felt the same way. Yes, we and India have diverged in the past. As democracies interested in common things, global commons, open seas, freedoms, etc., we needed to work with India. It was still a minority view in the United States, but the view was there. And after nuclear explosion, slowly contacts were established at different levels of America. They themselves also wanted to understand it better because they also understood in one sense that India had the necessity to test. They were not prepared to say it up front. They also understood that India had it. India would not roll back its program. Yes, we would freeze the program. We will not roll back the program. And that's how a series of discussions started with America. America moved a little bit, but not enough. The sanctions were not lifted. Then the Pakistanis, then Vajpayee went to Lahore. Again, the Americans saw this very positive. Yes, because in their mind, India's nuclear program was Pakistan oriented, not China. They felt we were bluffing when we said China, we meant Pakistan. Actually, it was China, actually, and Pakistan is a subsidiary element of it. He took the courageous step of going to Lahore, engaging with Pakistan and going to Lahore. Tremendous amount of political courage required, not at all popular. He did that. So the Americans realized that, yes, though India has nuclear weapons, Pakistan is, this courageous step has to be acknowledged and accepted. And as it was happening, General Musharraf decided to do a Kargil on us. We replied very robustly, but we did not open up front elsewhere where we could have in Rajasthan, in Punjab. We could have opened a front. We did not open the front. More important, we did not cross the line of control in the Kargil sector or anywhere in the Kashmir sector. We will defend ourselves because we realized the moment we became aggressive beyond our defense, the world would see India very differently. And certainly by our responsible behavior, a robust defense, but we were not being adventuresome. We were not being the gunslinging cowboy riding into town, that yes, India is different. And that convinced the Americans that yes, we have to engage with India seriously. They have done the test. In their mind, they were idiotic, but okay, let's now move ahead. And Vajpayee prepared the ground for it. In September 1998, well before Lahore and Kargil, at New York, he made the statement. He went into the history of India-America relations, how we diverged and made mistakes, and then said, going ahead, India and the USA are natural allies. The word was ally. No Indian Prime Minister before or since has used the word ally, even today. He did that to convince them, listen, look at us for what we are, not what you think in the Cold War, Pakistan is our guys and Indians are those guys. No, move beyond that. But I think so this combination of the test, reaching out to America, reaching out to Pakistan, and the conduct of the Kargil war, these contributed a much more favorable climate, which allowed people then in the American establishment to open up. Then relations picked up. Clinton changed. He came, spent 5 days in India, 5 hours in Pakistan. India was a massive hit. Vajpayee went to the White House. The biggest ever dinner hosted by the White House in its history was for Prime Minister Vajpayee by President Clinton. Then President Bush comes up. Bush embraces India very strongly. Condi Rice was very strongly pro-India. And so therefore, we could enter a strategic dialogue into much greater depth across the sectors. They signed something called the Next Steps in Strategic Partnership, NSSP. So by 2004, when unexpectedly left power, Mr. Vajpayee, India-America relationship was completely on the upswing. So even without the test, it was at a low level, nothing great. The test sent it to quote you, really, really south, really. And then to turn it around, not only bring it back to where it was before the test, but actually to take it up to a different level altogether. Again, that was not easy, but he achieved it and convinced the Americans that yes, we have a partner in India. So that made a lot of sense.
Well, that really tells a lot about him because, in every decision that he took, be it about the economy, opening up the economy, be it about going nuclear, be it about mending relations with the US, he's really, shown that how he can powerfully fight the systemic resistance. Because India's system at that point of time was rooted in socialist, pro-Soviet, and that kind of an era. So it was really strong of him to do that because from the outside we don't realize what kind of resistances a political leader has to face. So definitely great on that front, and also great of him to actually realize that we have to act responsibly to increase our soft power. Like smart power is both military and soft in nature. So like really visionary of him to realize that. Now, sir, a personal question for you. That as a bureaucrat, like how did you sort of make the decision to associate with him once your role as the secretary to leader of opposition got over? Because at that point of time, India had not witnessed its first non-Congress government ever that has lasted the full term. So how difficult was it, for you to choose that decision? What factors about his nature or his working style really motivated you to, take that decision?
Before that, let me answer one, just make a quick point. You said that we had the mindset in the establishment anti-America. It's still there. Yesterday in a discussion where I was conducting on foreign affairs, question was asked, have we given up all hedging against China? Have we put all our eggs in the American basket? So why do we try to balance China and America? Excuse me, we're going to balance China with America. America is not in pursuit for territory. America doesn't have a strategic alliance with Pakistan, Ukraine, this side. People still are able to get over the fact, 50 years of abusing the Americans has got into our DNA in one sense. We have to get rid of that. But on a personal thing you mentioned, for various reasons, mentioned the book, I knew the family. The critical decision taken was in 96 in the short-term government, 15-day government. This government won't last. If you come here, you'll get tainted in one sense. Anyway, I said it's a good experience. Let me see it. Government fell. And I was then still a director in the Commerce Ministry. So I was to go back. Then I was asked, would you like to stay on as the second leader of opposition? That, not 98, worried about the term. For a serving civil servant to work with the leader of opposition in parliament was unprecedented. The provision was there. Some years he had asked before, who had said yes but did not join. I joined. So I became the first. Later on, Pulak Chatterjee joined Sonia Gandhi also. I became the first bureaucrat to work in that position. That was an awkward thing to say the least. And yet it was not, because I was not expected by Mr. Vajpayee to be partisan at all. He respected civil service neutrality. So my job was to research for him, write his letters, prepare things for his speech, research for his speech, etc., but not to take political positions. I didn't even attend party meetings. I had to sit outside and wait for him, Many times I was called in because he wanted some information, but otherwise, no. And much later on in life, I came back to Delhi in 2012. 2012, Mrs. Sheila Dikshit was Chief Minister of Delhi. And she asked me, she said, I'm very glad you joined us. I have great faith in you. And she had never met me before. Why she had great faith in me? Because she said, you have worked with Mr. Vajpayee. Having worked with politicians at that level, I expect that your professional expertise is important to me, kind of a thing, that respecting civil service neutrality. So yes, at that moment, it seemed very, very difficult. A lot of people warned me against it. You get branded, etc., etc. I thought, let's see. I mean, why not take a chance? And working with him was difficult and a pleasure. Difficult because a man of few words. He said, you put him 100 letters in front of him, wanting to know what to do, and he would tell you nothing basically. Slowly with pattern, you understood. So one, he gave you a lot of space to work in. He never expected you to tell him what he already knew. No self-reinforcing kind of a thing. Give us your point of view, give us the facts. And when you came to know, then you understood that, okay, you have to prepare some replies. Give him the draft reply. He would then cut it out and improve it in the way that he wanted it. And before, he allowed you space to function. But in that sense, he didn't give you directions how to go about your job. He expected you to know it already. So it was a pleasure to work with him in that respect, absolutely. Man, a very clear focus, unlike what people think, not at all muddled in his thinking. This is by the economic logic, the strategic logic of the bomb, the strategic logic of engaging Pakistan and engaging America. I think all that came to bear. You could see all that happening. So it was a massive amount of learning experience for me, for which I'm grateful. I'm really grateful. So yes, it hurt me slightly in my professional career, once or twice, I think. But if I got so many highs also, I should expect some lows also. Life cannot be just a upward climb up. It does throw you down once in a while, which I think you should accept.
Definitely, sir. In fact, in mentioning that, you've partly answered the next question. I was about to ask you that it's always tough, for us, for common people to imagine, political leaders, especially the PM, the Prime Minister, in any other role. So, what I mean is that it's tough to differentiate, for example, between Vajpayee-Ji the person and Vajpayee-Ji the Prime Minister. Could you describe Vajpayee-Ji the person for us, or you've already done that? So how different was Vajpayee-Ji the person from him as the PM?
Okay. One thing, when he spoke before a crowd, he was in his complete element. Right? Absolute, mesmerizing, sensing the mood of the crowd, changing his language to make them, involve them. Sit with him alone, he was silent, quiet. I mean, he was not a naturally social person, fairly introverted, but yet when he saw an audience, a receptive audience, or somebody he could engage with, he was a different person altogether. So you have to take it both together. I mean, all of us have a private persona. Some of the people I know are most extrovert actually keep a lot of secrets to themselves completely. So it's, I mean, we're all complex. We're all complex individuals, very, very complex individuals. As the Prime Minister, he was always conscious of the fact that what I do can make a difference. And therefore, don't be rash. Don't take a quick decision. When people want quick decisions, sometimes they're required in a defense situation, in a crisis, yes. But if you only take quick decisions, you don't understand the complexity. We had to change our patent laws because our IPR laws were not consistent with the WTO standard which had come into play. And India was facing a lot of flack for that. Cases were there at the WTO and Americans put pressure. But there were resistance to it in India. This was giving up everything. We were into process patenting. So you change a minor part of the process and you could get through with a new patent. They went to product patenting and there were massive differences. But with cabinet discussing it twice, thrice, everybody being allowed to say. And finally, we did the changes which were legally required of us to be consistent with TRIPS norms. We did it, right? Everybody allowed everybody to speak, understand what their objections were, and then see what could be met, what simply could not be met. So it requires time. The complex issues should never be, people sometimes say normally the simple solution is the best solution. Not in making national policies, because the imponderables, the externalities, the law of unintended consequences, there's so many factors that you need to keep in mind. Otherwise, you think you're doing a great job, but actually you're causing a lot of problems. So as a Prime Minister, this was there. As I said, as a person, quiet, reading, listening, very good listener, very careful listener, even with his eyes closed. That was it, You mentioned love of good food.
Definitely, sir. I mean, that's one part of him that we, keep, reading, listening, and that's one part I'm sure everyone will associate to see the foodie side of, a prime minister. Also, sir, let's move on to the questions from the audience. These are the 4 or 5, questions or thoughts that's really, that really struck me when I was reading the book. And we are like, I personally, would consider myself fortunate that I got a chance to ask the author directly or personally, those questions. Now,
Pleasure.
let's move on to the questions from the audience. And we have one question first, which was already sent to us, through a form. The question was asked by Pranay Singh. Let me ask Pranay to unmute and ask the question. Pranay, are you there? Pranay, can you hear us out? No. Okay. So I'll ask his question, sir. He asks, that some say that, Rajesh Mishra ji was the super PM in Vajpayee's period, and, a lot of decisions that, happened in the cabinet meetings, were really influenced by his own understanding and style, and he was, the dominant figure in the PMO. So tell us something about that, and also that RSS was not much compatible with the Vajpayee government, or, the attitude of RSS towards that government was different from what it is towards, the Modi government. So your thoughts on Brajesh Mishra ji's influence and RSS's influence is what Pranay asks.
In the 19 months that I saw him as Prime Minister properly, March 1998, in the end of 1999, he must have had 30, 40 cabinet meetings. Mr. Mishra did not speak in any cabinet meeting. That is not the norm. Only ministers speak in cabinet meetings. Cabinet secretary introduces the subject, explains it, and keeps quiet. Members speak, others don't speak. Now, even in decisions where Mr. Brajesh Mishra convey outside the cabinet in many things, in each case, he had first checked it out, Mr. Vajpayee. They had a tremendous amount of mental synergies or whatever. They worked together, they understood each other better, because for some time they had been interacting on strategic matters, not on domestic policy issues, not on domestic politics or strategic affairs. But gradually, as Principal Secretary and as NSA, he widened his ambit, and then they got along very well with each other. And once, in fact, at some farewell, some officer said, "Sir, thank you very much. You got these decisions approved fast." Mr. Bajpayee said, "No, I always check up with the boss before telling you anything." So you do have situations where you feel that X is doing the job. Well, actually, X is actually maybe a partner in discussions, but it's actually the face of it, and not really. In fact, in the USA, when George Bush was president, Bush 43, and people said Cheney is running the government, Dick Cheney, the vice president, is running the government. After 9/11, Dick Cheney had literally stayed in the basement for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. In case there's another attack on the president is not there, vice president is available, safe to run the country there. And people suddenly said, okay, he's out for 4 weeks and government is still continuing to run. So, sometimes we shouldn't fall for these simplifications and caricatures, which Delhi did. But yes, in the period that I was there, and I can only speak of that period, I've researched the other period, I need to talk to people. They worked together very closely, but the decision making was Mr. Vajpayee's. No doubt it got inputs. Inputs is a different matter from actually taking a decision. Now, on the other one, which is a more different one, and I've addressed that in the book also, there were sections within the Raja Sangh Parivar, so the Shri Raghavan, who had a different point of view on economics, especially on reforms. Some of them had different views on how to run a coalition government, or we've compromised all our core ideologies. Now, to the first, there was engagement with them, but in the I think the Bangalore session of the BJP, January of 1999, they were all clearly finally it will be the government who has to take the decision. So we'll take your inputs. We may agree somewhere, we'll disagree somewhere. Some of those also use a lot of languages which are not really called for in public also. But I guess, when you're ideologically very committed and you see a government being formed, and you see a government is not doing what I want to do, people do tend to lose their sense, the sense of the righteousness or what is this happening kind of thing. But at the same time, When they had events they wanted, it was always available for them. He met them regularly, available for them. So there were definitely divergent points of views, starting with the government itself, whether a defeated person should be in the cabinet or not, to economic policies, and to working with the allies. Have we compromised too much? But that is a dynamic process of change. Initially, Mr. Vajpayee was weaker and had to concede a lot. Later on, as he became stronger on his feet in the sense of grip of the government surviving, he could then reverse it and push his agenda forward. But I think that dynamic between the organization which created the party and organizations, Swayamsevaks who actually help you in the elections, to the party, which is purely a political being and not a social being, I think there would always be tension. There would always be tension. At some moments, there are greater alignment of views. Some moments, the alignment of views are less, and therefore you show up in these disagreements. But at the end of the day, on core issues, which Mr. Vajpayee himself said in Parliament, he said, we have not given up our core issues. We have the reason he says by Article 370, Reform Civil Code, and Ram Janmabhoomi is not in our national agenda of governance of the NDA is because the BJP has 160 members of parliament out of 540. So the point was, you have to make political compromises. If you have the numbers, obviously your agenda is different. So I think this is what people don't really appreciate, these nuances of politics, these nuances of how do you manage coalitions and how do you look for a larger goal while sometimes putting certain things on the side for a more opportune moment.
Definitely, sir. Okay, next question we have from Shubham. He's raised his hand. Shubham, kindly, and let me just unmute you and you can go ahead and ask the question, please. Shubham Sharma.
Yes, very good evening to one and all. Sir, I just want to know, once Atal ji said that कि मैं राजनीति छोड़ना चाहता हूँ पर राजनीति मुझे नहीं छोड़ना चाहती है. So sir, really I just want to know, was he really a political person in person, or what was his views on today's politics?
Shubham, if I can draw your attention, this is a book called Bindu Bindu Vichar, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, edited by somebody else with the Kitab Ghar publication, where Mr. Vajpayee has written a long essay, very long essay, and he argued the point you are making. He's talking about मैं छोड़ नहीं सकता हूँ, and finally he says, I am a political person. So people sometimes I feel I should give up politics and write poetry, but then he realizes he can't. His first interest is politics, and therefore he cannot leave politics, So in that sense, he was very political. Being political does not mean unidimensional. You see. Therefore, he enjoyed other things. We had to ensure that he didn't eat too much samosas between morning and lunch. He enjoyed writing poetry. He enjoyed interacting and listening to people. So, we should accept politicians to be like us and not be something very different. So politician did not always means the crude type that you think. Politicians also could be people who are interested, who think about the country, who have a vision in mind, but to also realize that compromises have to be made if you have to gain politically. So, it's that kind of picture that I wanted to portray. To get a chance, Shubham, please read this book, Bindu Bindu Vichar, Kitab Ghar Publications. I'm recommending somebody else's book and not my own, because I think that essay, I learned a lot from reading it. I've read it about 4 or 5 times. It's worth reading it.
Okay, so
I
we
quoted that Nagasaki poem also from that book. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Shubham.
We can ask Shubham to read your book first and then maybe go for that book.
Yes. Shubham, please read this book. And now the price has come down also. That means I guess less royalty. But I think people have told me, I'm not praising it myself, I should not, I have no business to do so. And it makes a generally easy read. It does not tax the reader, and yet it keeps you engaged in that sense. So I've tried my best. As I said, it's up to the readers to tell me how well I've succeeded.
Next question we have from Vishoka. Vishoka, let me unmute you. Kindly go ahead and ask. Vishoka, if you're speaking, we're not able to hear you out. I think some technical issue from her side. Let's get back to her when the technical issue is resolved. So there's another question that Mr. Prasad has asked us, through the form that we had circulated, that the current regime or the current prime minister has not faced the media. That's not really, he believes, the courageous, way to, operate. And Mr. Vajpayee, on the other hand, displayed nerves of steel in his decisions and in his, media briefings. He was able to face the media. He didn't. He asked all the questions that were asked to him. He answered all the questions that were asked to him. So, what do you think? I mean, do political leaders have a responsibility towards facing questions from the media, or in today's times when leaders believe that they have a much stronger and direct connect with the masses and they probably don't need brokers or media people to affect that link? Does it make sense, or is it responsible of them to take the direct route towards public and having a conversation?
That's a tough one. I tell you why. One, of course, I'm not an expert of the current situation. My book is a research book of the late 1990s. 20 years, a lot of time has passed and things are different. So much of. Second, yes, basically the media is there as a medium. That's what's called the media, right? It's a medium of exchange. Ideas to go from me to you and from you to me. If you can do without the intermediation and you can approach people directly and get your feedback directly, you may feel I don't need the media. Is it good politics or bad politics? That the results will demonstrate. Because I cannot tell a politician that what you're doing will make you lose elections. That is simply not my job. My job is to raise issues, yes. If we get addressed, right? If we don't get addressed, I have various means to get other people involved in it, right? But whether somebody chooses to meet the media in the direct way or not, Mr. Vajpayee did meet media in smaller groups, on a plane, etc. But large press conferences, I think even he did that possibly 1 or 2 in 6, 7 years. He also didn't do it very often. But yes, he made them in smaller groups and traveling while walking to a car and people are ambushing you. In that sense, yes, he was different. He did that. Mr. President Prime Minister Modi feels that he can approach the people directly through his Man Ki Baat, to social media, and the feedback that he gets, which he then uses also. He always mentions the feedback that he gets. So I guess he feels that is it good politics, bad politics? I will leave it to him to decide whether it suits him or doesn't suit him. And if somebody's unhappy with it, I don't think so anybody can force you to like him. It's up to you whether you like him or you don't like him.
And I think the greatest conference that any political leader is accountable to is the election franchisee stuff that happens every 5 years. Nothing
exactly.
Really is that, as long as
yeah.
Right.
So if people think they're believing me, obviously my message is getting through to them, right? And my audience is the people. The press is the media. So whether it's TV, newspapers, all these other platforms that you have, they're only a medium of, if I can do without the medium, earlier require wires to connect. Now we use cell phones without the wires, right? Do you need a wire? No, I don't need a wire. I mean, you can't tell you, no, you must use a wire. So in that sense, people do get upset. People do get upset about it. I can understand why.
Yeah. So we have another question from Deepmala Sharma. She asks, that Vajpayee ji's views on foreign relations with Pakistan, they changed based on what situation he was facing. So initially he went to Lahore on the bus trip, on the famous bus trip. Then he had to face the Kargil war. And after that, he decided that, okay, no, maybe the time is right to actually go ahead and mend the relations. So he went ahead and held or organized the Agra summit. So, his views on Pakistan, his views on Kashmir and the entire security situation, what were his thoughts about it? Did he really wish that he's able to solve the Pakistan issue, in his tenure? Also, how different was his attitude towards Pakistan from your analysis of the current government's views towards Pakistan? Of course, both the situations are not the same. We have different security situations that evoke different responses. But even then, I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Various thoughts. One, of course, my book is on Mr. Vajpayee, not on Mr. Modi. If I get a lot of questions on Mr. Modi, I take them. I have no issue with them. Two things guided Mr. Vajpayee on Pakistan. One was that, as he used to always say, you can change your friends, but not your neighbors. Pakistan is your neighbor. Today, economically, the asymmetry in Pakistan is a lot. 7 times larger today we are. Those days we were not 7 times larger, 3 times larger. So, things were different then. Second, he felt that if somebody could make a breakthrough with Pakistan, it would only be somebody from the Jan Sangh or the BJP. Because they did not have the ideological baggage of partition, of governments, and basically catering to the kind of voter base that they had, BJP could come out like Richard Nixon go to China. In that sense, he felt that the BJP could do it, and therefore he was very keen on it. He also, I guess, realized that if you have good equations with Pakistan, and it's a two-way traffic, just that you want good equations, they should also want it, right? Kargil proved him wrong. Attack on Parliament House proved him wrong. He was proved wrong many times on that, but that's what his point was. If we have lower level of security expenditure vis-a-vis Pakistan on the border, possibly you're releasing that much more resources for your other needs. It made a lot of sense. Whether he liked Pakistan or not is not the issue. Pakistan was there. He could neither swallow it nor spit it out, kind of thing. He had to handle it. And he did want to handle it towards improved relations. Also, which I mentioned in the context of the nuclear test, the world was watching you interact with Pakistan. So he had to show the world, yes, having tested, we want good relations with Pakistan. And therefore Agra. Agra came about because Lahore was required because of the test. Agra was required that the situation had deteriorated and people felt that you have to do something. And therefore he said, let me take another chance. It didn't work out. Again, he went for the SAARC summit to Pakistan itself once again in the early 2004 for the SAARC summit. Again, to make one more effort in case we can improve relationship. I mean, that was a goal. Then Pakistan had this fear. It's a self-propagated, it's not a real fear, but that the Pakistani elite has pushed this idea toward the country of Pakistan, that India wants to grab Pakistan. Why would India want to grab Pakistan? We have enough problems of our own. We don't have the 200 million of them to add to our problems, you know. He went to Minar Pakistan, which is to mark the spot where the Muslim League in 1940 basically wanted a homeland for the Muslims of India. And he went there and said, you know, okay, I wish you all the best. So people told him, oh, you're going to certificate to Pakistan. He says, Pakistan does not need my certificate to exist. It is there, right? So he was very conscious of the fact that he had to disabuse people a lot of notions and that whether India and Pakistan could live together. Nawaz Sharif reciprocated the feeling. The Pakistani, which depends on insecurity in Pakistan and depends on tensions with India, cannot obviously want peace with India. Otherwise, they all raison d'etre, first the Pakistani army, and then ultimately Pakistan itself would go away. And that is something that we sometimes ignore. I mean, what was the idea? Hindus and Muslims are two people who cannot live together, right? That was the idea. If you have complete peace, and then why do you need a separate country? You can live with each other, right? So we underestimate Pakistan's need for tensions with India, and which is why efforts were required, did not bear fruit. Today, the situation is different. Asymmetries have grown tremendously vis-a-vis Pakistan. And in that sense, it's an irritant to you now today. Pakistan is not a threat to you. Your threat is somewhere else, to the north.
Definitely so. In fact, one follow-up thought on that. Do you feel that, most of the Indian prime ministers, let's say they enter the office and they have this plan of mending relations with Pakistan and forging peace between the two countries, but, probably in doing that and expecting that they either underestimate, Pakistan's plans, or maybe they kind of, have nostalgia over, becoming the prime minister who are able to, bring peace along the border. But, we see that when they exit, they do realize that it's one situation which you can't really change because you can't you're dealing with a civilian government that's not the de facto power. So
Exactly.
that's one thing that we see common throughout. Okay, so one last question from the audience because we have 4 minutes left. Can we have a show of hands from the audience? Okay, so we'll go for one pre-recorded question that we had received through the form. It was with respect to the tech policy, the telecommunications policy, in fact, brought in by the Vajpayee government. And in India, we feel that telecommunications revolution was brought in, let's say, a decade back, but not really so because again, like 1991 reforms, it was Vajpayee who actually carried the reforms to its fortunate end or to its fortunate goal. So, what are your thoughts on Vajpayee's telecommunications policy?
Yeah, somewhat at the beginning, I'll just reiterate it or go into more details about it. We had allowed this, we had auctioned off the various circles for telecom, and the estimation of the market was very, very much higher. That didn't work out. We had to make this change. We formed a committee, broad committee. It put out papers, then it invited suggestions. The committee had by Jaswant Singh received 40 1,000 suggestions. This was the first time public policy in India was being debated out. Based on that, we moved to a revenue sharing, which allowed the rates to fall and telecom to penetrate the country. I mean, it is unbelievable what the situation was. Rajiv Gandhi initiated the idea, but that policy of telematics did not work out actually. Narasimha Rao started it with the 94 policy and the licensing, which again ran into a wall. It was 99 policy, which actually 98 started. People opposed it, went to courts. We love going to courts for all kinds of purposes. So it took later, end of 99 to complete this process. That suddenly opened up the world for India. We realized how much of a difference it makes to our lives to have cell phones. Those days when we came home, we all switched off our phones. Even I had a phone. We had to switch off my phone because you couldn't afford 60 rupees a minute calls, So you made a calls only when you required to make a call. Today, it's the cheapest rates anywhere in the world. Really anywhere in the world. These are the cheapest rates. So, that is the kind of change that we went through. Again, in retrospect, we look for the big deal. Having lived through it, please read the newspapers of that period. It was attacked within the party. How can you violate you have a contract, let the companies fail? That's their problem, not our problem. No, sir, it is our problem. Opposition parties attacked him. Activists attacked him. Activists went to court. Newspapers are full of articles attacking this move. Why is government compromising? Government is compromising for your sake. It's not a compromise. As a regulator, I'm not only committed to this generation, I'm committed to the sector, I'm committed to the next generation. Can you imagine without cell phones, what would we be today? We were forced to do it much later on at a higher cost. This was, I think, best possible way to have done it. I saw some hands were in between and some comment made in between. I'll leave it to you, Dipanshu. As I was speaking, I saw somebody say something.
Okay. Currently, I think this no show hands probably would have done it by mistake.
It was a comment, kindly. It was a comment
Okay.
beginning with the word kindly.
Yeah. I had written it out on the.
Oh, you had written. Okay, fine.
Yeah. Fine. So and definitely, sir. I mean, importance of mobile phones extremely great, and we could feel it in 2 years of lockdown. That mobile phones are extremely important, and we can use it both productively and for other reasons. And any final questions from the audience? In fact, it's almost time, so let's go for the.
So let's end by requesting everybody to pick up the book on Kindle, physical form. Give us your feedback. Tell me you like it, or what do you think should be done about it? How to improve it?
Definitely, sir. I think today's session is really going to contribute towards our interest in reading it because, through, talking to you, we really got a sneak peek of a PMO that's not really easy to find, because you've spent great deal of time, with a leader who served as one of the most transformational PMs the country had ever seen. So thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us, and we wish you the best of health. We look forward to, in fact, reading more and engaging in discussions. Also, this was the third episode under our, series started by the reading community called Rendezvous with Authors. In fact, this is the first session when we have partnered with Rath Foundation, the leading NGO from Haryana, who's been very active throughout COVID, been distributing blankets, thousands of them, and will soon be opening up operations in Delhi. It's a registered NGO and has permanently partnered with Readers Cafe to organize and, in fact, help us organize, these sessions. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, audience, for participating in this session.
A pleasure talking to you.